Ash fell first, soft as sifted flour, and no one in the courtyard understood what it meant. A pale grit collected on the rim of a fountain and freckled the sleeves of a woman standing under an arcade. She looked up toward the mountain across the bay and saw a column climbing the sky, white at its edges and darker at the core, like a pine tree thrown upside down with the trunk on the earth and the branches clawing heaven. The hour was late morning in the Bay of Naples, late summer or early autumn of the year 79, and trade boats angled for harbor as the wind pushed the plume toward the towns below. Someone called inside for Drusilla to come away from the light. She wiped her arm clean and did not move. She had grown up with omens and proclamations. This was something else, noise under the feet of the world. Her name drew a certain look in any room from Judea to Rome. Drusilla, daughter of Herod Agrippa I, sister to Agrippa II and Bernice, the youngest, the one whose beauty court poets compared to goddesses and whose marriages bent law and custom. She had been promised as a girl to a prince from Commagene, who broke his oath when he would not take her people's sign in the flesh. She married instead Azizus of Emesa, a Syrian king who did, and thought the contract would hold. Then Antonius Felix, the Roman governor of Judea, saw her, sent go-betweens, and persuaded her to cast off her vows and marry him. The scandal trailed them like a barge wake. It followed them to Caesarea, where Drusilla sat once in a governor's hall while a prisoner named Paul spoke of righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. Felix cut the hearing short when the words pricked him. Drusilla said little, but she listened. Years later, when Felix fell and the family moved to Italy, the story remained. The daughter of a king who chose a Roman and the son they had together. By the time Vesuvius opened, Drusilla was not the court debutante Josephus had glimpsed. She was a mother with a boy at her side. The household had come to Campania for the same reasons as other families with a little money: clean air, soft water, rented rooms near the sea. When the mountain robbed itself of quiet, the first message was light. The day dimmed as if a lampwick were pinched. Pumice began to fall, feather-light stones that bounced off clay roof tiles and collected in stable drifts. Sailors at Stabii and Messinum leaned on the rails and squinted into an afternoon that looked like dusk, listening to a sound like distant surf that was not the sea. Drusilla ordered the servants to bring cloaks and strong shoes, and to bind up hair and cover faces with cloths dampened at the lip of the fountain. She had learned in a different kind of crisis that time used poorly is time you never get back. The streets outside the gate already churned. Men tried to lead donkeys, shutters banged, somewhere tiles skittered down a roof and rang like plates. The wind brought a smell of rot and hot stone. When the first real rock fell, a lump big enough to break a collarbone if it struck true, she herded her boy under the arch and waited for the surge to pass. From courtyards up and down the block, people called to one another by name to keep themselves from going alone. By late afternoon, the column that rose over Vesuvius darkened until it ate the sun. Night fell before night. Torches guttered in the wind. The pumice, driven by the blast, piled high enough to block doors and push at gates from the outside. A neighbor hacked a path with a mattock, clearing a channel to the lane. Drusilla moved when he did, counting steps and breaths, a hand on her son's shoulder. The iron taste in the air bit the tongue. At the corner, a soldier, no one recognized from the vicinity, urged the crowd toward the harbor and then vanished into the flow. From that direction came a new sound, lower and less regular than the mountain, roof beams failing under weight. Through the first long hours, nothing burned. Stones fell, and the darkness deepened. Then the column, too heavy to hold itself, began to break and fall back down the mountain in waves of hot ash and gas that ran faster than any man. Herculaneum, west along the shore, met the first of those waves before midnight, and never had time to scream. The air there superheated and robbed lungs in an instant. Closer to the cone, small towns were erased. In Pompeii and the settlements east, pumice buried streets to the lintels, and then the surges came, curling through alleys, spilling over walls, finding every open mouth and hollow. No one kept a ledger of footsteps in that last hour, but the pattern that emerges from bodies and doorways is plain. Drusilla's household moved toward the bay and stalled when the wind shifted and the pomace drifted higher against the way out. She turned back with others, choosing a cross street where the ground still showed. Her son clutched a small packet of papers, a Roman boy's habit learned in a Roman house, holding on to proof of his own name. Servants fell behind and were pulled forward by the elbow. A tile caught a man in the temple, and he sagged and did not rise. The sound of the mountain grew lower, like a drum buried in sand. In the morning that never came, the final surges poured down the cone and across the buried city. The blast front knocked down what the stones had spared. Ash rolled into alleys like a tide. In those seconds, the difference between the righteous and the wicked meant nothing to the throat. Drusilla's boy stumbled. She turned, pulled him up, and felt a wind on her face that came with no relief. It was a heat that went through fabric and flesh. People caught in that breath froze where they stood, bodies seizing, mouths open to a cloud that filled them. They fell in doorways, and in the act of running, and in the posture of prayer. When the country around the mountain finally saw daylight again, Vesuvius had made a new hill out of ash and a new shoreline out of mud. The bay was choked with scum. Boats that had beat for safety lay half buried in wet cinders. Word ran north across Italy and back east across the sea. In Judea and Syria, it was said that Drusilla, Herod's daughter who married the Roman and listened once to the man in chains, had died with her child in the catastrophe. Josephus, writing years later, recorded plainly that her son by Felix, Agrippa, perished in the eruption during the reign of Titus. Many carried that line forward with a second clause. His mother died in the same calamity, blown out of time with him. Whether a historian wrote it or a neighbor whispered it, the story closed that way, mother and son together under a sky that would not quit. The officials in Rome counted losses the way officials do. Lists came in from Campania, with names crossed off and notes in the margins for those of status. Villas belonging to senators were gone. Estates that had raised money for Rome's wars lay under yards of powder. A few survivors described what they had seen, a cloud shaped like an umbrella pine. Day turned to pitch, stones that fell without end, a breath of air that killed. Pliny the Younger set it down in letters so the sensation of it would not be lost. In those accounts there is no pause for a princess. She is part of the general ruin, known because of the line she belonged to and the life she had made with a Roman. If the story were told only as scandal, it would stop at the hearing in Caesarea where Paul's words struck Felix like a blow, and Drusilla watched the effect without flinching. But lives do not end on the steps of a courthouse. They end where people are. Hers ended in a province more than a week's sail from the synagogue, where she had learned the songs of her people, in a house rented for the season because the water was sweet. She had come through the crush of empire and disease and palace intrigue. She had learned how to make a place for herself in rooms where men carried the law in their mouths. And then the ground under the mountain gave way, the sky reversed, and there was no place to be made at all. Years later, diggers would open courtyards and cellars and find the hollow spaces left by bodies and pour plaster into them, lifting ghosts into the light. You cannot tell a name from a cast, not down to the bone. But in the registers that stood behind those shapes were entries that matched a rumor passed from house to house and letter to letter. The daughter of Herod Agrippa once the most beautiful woman in Judea, dead with her son in the day, silence fell on the Bay of Naples. A thread from Acts crossed a thread from the annals of a volcano, and a life that had moved through courts and crises met an ending no court could delay. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.